Triple your pattern making in 3 easy steps. Step 1 is scan, step 2, convert to CAD, and step 3, flatten 3D to 2D. This is exact flatten, scan to pattern, and we'll show you how.
Hi, welcome to this video in which I'm going to show you how to take a scan from your Peel scanner, send it over to your Peel to CAD software, and then send that information over to your ExactFlat software. So first of all, I have my scan here, but before I send it over to Peel to CAD, I'm going to decimate my scan mesh, which is going to allow me to have the smaller triangles become larger in the areas where I don't need as much detail. So in other words, the triangles are going to be larger and there's going to be less triangles, which is going to reduce my file size by a lot. Okay, so now that it's done, I am ready to send it over to my Peel to CAD software. In fact, I can even delete my scans and then save this as a different name. Underscore P2C for Peel to CAD. Okay, now that I'm in my Peel to CAD software, I'm going to first clean my mesh. And this column is showing me all of the triangles that are affected by different things that I can fix, like spikes, narrow triangles, creased edges. And if I'm ever not sure what any of these mean, I can click on the help section, and the help section is very useful for when you are doing a certain action. Here I'm cleaning the mesh, and right here it is talking about different things on how to clean the mesh. Okay, so I'll click on apply, and then OK. And then next thing I'm going to do is fill in these holes. So I can click on fill holes, and it looks like I have 52 holes that I can fill. Now, if I move the slider bar, it's going to fill in the smaller holes first, and those are indicated by the yellow holes. And as I go higher and higher, I'm filling in more and more of the holes. I don't want to fill in the bottom one, because I'm going to be using that later for my alignment. So I'll just click on apply and then OK. All right, so next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a circle to use for my alignment. And I'm going to use the building mode of boundary selection. And then I just click on the boundary or the edge of the scan, and I click on create. Next, I click on plane to add my plane. I'm going to use triangle selection for my building mode. And then I'm going to use boundary selection for my selection tool. When I use boundary selection and I click on that boundary, it highlights a row of triangles along that boundary. So those are the triangles that I'm using to create this plane. In other words, the circle is going to be on that same plane because that's how I made the same circle using the boundary. All right, next thing I would do is I would create a line of symmetry or a plane of symmetry. So I do that by going to plane, and my building mode this time is going to be mesh symmetry plane. My options are to either choose plane 1, which doesn't really make sense here, or draw a line, or pick 3 vertices. So I will draw a line approximately down the middle, but the software is going to do the rest of the calculations using the rest of my scan that I have. Okay, so that yellow plane is actually where my symmetry plane would be. I can click on create and then close. All right, so now that I've made my circle, my 2 planes, I'm going to move my origin down to that bottom of the hole. And I do that by clicking on Align to Origin. And then I restrict different entities. So my circle 1, I'm going to use that as my origin XYZ. Then my plane 1, I'm going to use that as my plane XY. And then lastly, my plane 2, I'm going to constrict that to my YZ plane. Now, as you can see, my part is kind of upside down. I want my Z to be pointing the other way. So I can click on the flip button here under circle 1. Oh, and I can't actually because that's the origin XYZ, but I can click my XY plane to flip that. And then my plane 2 to flip it the other way as well. Okay, so now at this point I can use my cube to be able to see different points of view. And that's going to be really useful for when I'm cleaning. All right, so at this point, I'm ready to start cleaning my mesh a lot more. There are certain things that I know for sure I want to clean up, like I don't want this little indentation here. So I can use my rectangular selection, hold down the Control key, and click and drag. And then I click on Defeature. So that smooths that out there. But I still have little wrinkles here and there that I want to fix. So I can go bit by bit highlighting them everywhere. But keep in mind that the larger ones that you highlight, there's going to be a little bit more issues with taking a little bit more time. So you want to do them bit by bit. Also, I don't know if you saw when I clicked on Defeature, it said irregularities were found within the selected part of the mesh. This is very common, especially when you have a blue triangle still hiding within your selected area. So to fix that, just click on the Grow Selection tool, and then you can shrink it again if you wish to. You click on Defeature again, and it works the second time. So I'm going to go around highlighting different regions, just smoothing everything around here. Now you can either use the paintbrush selection tool, which is what I'm doing right now, or you can use the freeform selection tool. I'm going to make sure I don't highlight my corner here, and I do that by hitting Control and Shift at the same time. While holding those down, I do my left click everywhere where I want to unselect. And before I let go of Control Shift, I do a right click. So I can hit Defeature, and it's much smoother there. Another way to clean things up is by creating holes and then filling them in depending on their form. So in this case, I'm going to use the similar normal tool, and I'll click on this planar area of the bottom seat, and it says unable to create selection with current vertex. In order to allow it to select that region, I'm going to raise my tolerance up, and then it's selecting this region. The reason it wasn't selecting before was because it didn't consider it very planar-like until I said, go a little bit easier on it. I still have some blue regions here that I'm also going to want to delete, so I can just grow that selection, and maybe just a few more just to make sure, and then I can shrink them back down. Now in this case, I kind of just want to select the flat region, but I do even want to select it all the way back to the edge here. So for that, I'm going to use my freeform selection tool and highlight a little bit more around here. and it looks like I highlighted too much, I'd hit Control and Shift and just deselect once again. Right click. And now I'm ready to delete. I can also hit delete on my keyboard as well. So if I want to fill that hole, I can either do it with low curvature, high curvature, or flat method. I'm going to choose flat since I do want this to be pretty flat there. And I click there. And it gave me a smooth boundary layer of two layers, which means that there's about 2 rows of triangles in which it blends in. But I actually don't want to do that, so I'm going to hit undo. And then I'm going to go to 0 here. And you can play around with that number and see which one fits your need best. Okay. So now I'm ready to clean up a little bit more around the corners here, because when I cut these pieces into different fabrics, I'm going to want to make sure that I have a nice smooth cut right along here. But as you can tell, it's a little bit wrinkly. So in order to fix that, I can go to my Fill Holes tool, and even while I'm in Fill Holes tool, I can still select certain regions. So I'll use my Paintbrush Selection tool, and holding down the Control key and scrolling up increases the size of my paintbrush. So I bring it to a size that makes a little bit of sense there, and then I highlight the regions that I'm about to delete. If at any point this plane gets in the way, or you don't want to see it anymore, you can click on your project tree, the drop-down arrow for entities, and then hide your plane 1, plane 2, and circle 1. You can also hide them or show them all by opening the entity's eye. Okay, so going back to my Filling Holes tool, I can click on Delete, and then I'll use low curvature to fill in this hole. So there it's much smoother than before, with a little bit of stuff I can still fix. So I can keep on going around and doing a bunch of more defeature tools. I'll use my freeform selection for that. And I want to make sure that I do the same thing for the zipper in the back. Now notice when I do these defeatures, I'm trying not to make them super giant. And that's because with the larger of a defeature selection you've made, the longer you're going to be waiting. It's a little hard to see, but there is a little seam that was here as well. So I'll defeature that too. And it's starting to look pretty smooth now. Now I do know that I'm going to also want to smooth out right along here because that's where I'm going to cut part of my cloth. So I can either choose defeature or fill holes. So you can play with each one and decide how you want to do it. Let's say that you're in the middle of clicking with your paintbrush selection tool and you realize you don't want it to be that thick and you want it thinner. So you can actually hold down, while you're still holding down your control key, you can scroll down on your mouse and it makes the paintbrush thinner there. So the rest of the stuff I think I'm going to do with the defeature tool. Now, if at any point you think that you've lost some information, you can always click on undo and then try your hand at it again. Much better. And if you're not sure, you can also do this tool called compare, and you can do compare to before defeature. So you can see by how much it's varying. This blue represents a negative number, and it's showing that you have less material or negative material than what you used to have before. So if you feel like that number is a little too high, you can close it and click on undo. And then you just fix your site again. Looks pretty smooth now. Just be sure that wherever you're going to put your seam has been defeatured and is nice and smooth. All right, looks like we're still missing some smoothness here. And here. Okay, looks pretty good. At this point, we can also do a smooth mesh. So I'll go all the way up to 100. I'll allow my max deviation to be 0.1 millimeters. And just to better see what's going on, I can click on triangles and wireframe on my display. And the deviation might be so slight we might not even see it, so let's see what happens here. We'll click on preserve boundary, and we'll click on apply. So it was either already smooth, or maybe I already did it and didn't remember. Also, I know that I'm going to want to make this boundary at the bottom nice and smooth, and I know it's pretty circular, so I can actually edit it so that it becomes a perfect circle. And I can do that by clicking on Edit Boundary, and then choosing Fit to Entity. And either I can use this boundary as my circle, or if I've already made a circle before, I can choose that circle to make my entity or my boundary fit to that entity. So if I click on apply, then that circle or that boundary becomes a nice smooth circle. Okay, so now that I've smoothed a lot of things out here, what I'm going to do is, well, first off, I can see that I have about 75,000 triangles, which is a good amount of triangles for my exact flat software. So at this point, I can start cutting my chair. So since everything's pretty smooth, I don't see any more spots where I can clean up. Then I'm ready to start cutting the pieces. Now, whenever I do something that's pretty drastic, like cutting pieces apart, I usually like to right-click and duplicate my mesh so that I still have an original to work off of in case I make a mistake within my duplicate. So I'll start working on this duplicate, and in order to do that, I'm going to have to create some curves to separate the different pieces. So first I'll go to create a curve, and I'll just start clicking along where this curve should be. Whenever I'm coming around the corner, I like to put a few more dots on there. And if I ever feel like I'm actually straying a little too far, I can click on any of these dots and move them back or forward wherever they need to go. Okay, since I've already aligned my part, I can click on my cube to see if things look evenly from one side to the other. So if I feel like maybe one side is a little too far, I can adjust everything. Or maybe if something's a little too far on the other side, I can adjust it as well. Oops. Okay, so everything looks pretty even now. I can click on Create now. If I do want there to be an allowable deviation as well, I can increase my maximum deviation allowance too. So in that case, I would be able to, instead of it fitting exactly onto the mesh, I could say I want a deviation of 0.5 millimeters, and that mesh will become a little bit smoother. So I'll put maybe 1 millimeter there, and now my mesh is smoother there on those parts of the curves. I can click on Create and then Close. So now I have one curve that splits the top part away from the bottom part, but I haven't just split it just yet. So I have to click on Cut Mesh by Curve, choose Curve 1, and then I have to say keep both parts, the top and the bottom. Click on Apply and then OK. And now I have my Mesh 1, Duplicate 1, and my Mesh 1, Duplicate 1, Cut Mesh by Curve. So just to make things a little bit easier, I'm going to call this one Top, and I'm going to call this one Bottom. So I can continue working from my top section. And the way you know that you're working on something is because it'll be in blue on your screen. If you have the eye closed, you won't be able to see it. And you might even be able to see something else. So even though I'm working on Mesh 1 top, I can't see it because my eye is closed. And I only see Mesh 1 bottom, even though it's not active. So if I were to try to delete something here, it wouldn't let me. It would only bring it back to Mesh 1 top. So I'll clear the selection there, and then I'll start cutting what I need to do here. Now here, even though I've smoothed this top part out, I can still be able to decimate some of my triangles there because this is a planar area. So I'm going to click on Decimate, and right now it says 38,000. I'm going to just choose Apply just to see what it does. And so it increases the number of triangles there. I actually don't want to do that because I also wanted to keep my boundary preserved. So let me hide this and show you exactly what I mean. When I click on Decimate, I have the option of preserving my boundary. In other words, this curve is not going to change. That cut area right there. So I also know that I want my max deviation to not change by too much. So I can leave it at 0.1, or I can change it if I'm willing to do so. So 0.2, something like that. And I can say 38,000 triangles, apply, and now I have larger triangles in this region. And then OK. Okay, so continuing on, so I can keep on cutting this chair into different pieces. I am going to click on the outermost edge of where this corner should be, and then I'll click along. Where I want my seam to go. Now remember when I defeatured this, I did get rid of some detail, and that's okay, because we really just want the cloth where it's going to be, and we want this area to be smooth as well. So I'll choose 0.5 millimeter, or actually we went with 1 previously, so we'll stick with 1 there, and then we'll create the curve. Close it. I'll cut the mesh by curve using my curve 2 that I just made, and I'm once again going to keep both parts. Click on apply and OK. So now my mesh 1 top, it's not just my mesh 1 top, but it's also my seat section. Hide that, and I'll work on this top part. And I'm going to separate the 2 different arms. So here, I'm going to make another curve, and I'm going to separate that curve right along where the seam would go. Create, close, and cut. Keep both parts. And so it looks like something I did with the curve, I might have either not gone to the end, or I might have maybe made it a little bit too jagged or too smooth. So I can go back and delete that curve and create it again. I'll this time put a 0.5 millimeter, create it, close, and cut. I do want to keep both parts. I apply and OK. So now this one will be called I'll call it my right arm section. And this one is ready to be split into 2 as well. Now, if I want it to be pretty similar to the other side, I should be looking at this section here and kind of figuring out if I'm pretty close or not. Make sure I get all the way to the edge. Looks pretty good. 0.5, create, close. Keep both parts. And now I can rename this one left arm section. Lastly, I have this one to cut. And if you remember correctly, I actually already made a symmetry plane, so I can use that same plane to cut this mesh. But since I have created that plane in a different mesh, I'm going to have to copy that plane over to my mesh 1 top, this section. So I go looking for it, and it was my plane 2 in this one. And then I right click and choose send to this mesh. Now that I've sent it there, I'm going to be able to cut it in half, because now I have it here. And I'm going to do that by clicking on cut mesh. I'm going to use plane 2. I'm going to keep both parts and just preview where it's going to cut. Right down there, that's good. And then OK. So now I can look at this one, which is my mesh 1 top, and I'm going to rename this mesh 1 top left side. And this one's going to be my, oops, oh, I forgot to erase the cut mesh by curve section part. And then mesh 1 top. Right side. I still want to cut this one down the middle. So I'll bring it down to a good view, and then I'll create a plane using my draw line plane creation mode. I hold down Control and I just draw a line right across. And then click Create and close. Now I also want this same plane to go over to my top left side. So just so I don't forget to do it later, I'm going to send it to my mesh 1 top left side. So now I have it here as well. So mesh 1 top left side, I'm going to cut it with my plane 2. So my plane 1, I mean. Keep both parts. And OK. I can rename this left bottom side. And rename this one left top side. It's a lot easier to work with things when you know which one you're looking at. So mesh 1 top right side, that's this one here. We're going to cut that one with the plane as well. Right top side. Right bottom side. Okay, that section is done. Now I can look at mesh 1 bottom. Now mesh 1 bottom, remember I had that symmetry plane, and I can use that to cut my mesh. So I'll use the cut mesh tool there. And I don't have that plane yet, so I'll have to bring it over. I'm seeing it here. Send to mesh 1 bottom. And then I can close that eye. And under mesh 1 bottom, I can now cut it with my plane 2. Keep both parts. mesh 1 bottom, left, mesh 1 bottom, right. I still have one more cut to go, and that's going to be right down here, one line right here. And I know that since my part is symmetric, the cut that I do from this side can also be done on this side. So I really just have to make one plane to go right down the middle. Now instead of trying to get it perfect and make it aligned, I can also click on my cube, and I know that it's looking at it straight away. So let's look at our mesh 1 bottom left. We can draw a plane line and click from here down to here while holding Control. I click Create and then Close. That was my plane 1, and I can forward that over to my mesh 1 bottom right. I'm going to cut the mesh with the curve, cut the mesh with the plane. Keep both parts, preview it, yep. And then the same thing goes for the bottom right side. I can call this left front. Right back. Right front. And left back. So at this point I have my original. So if I hold Control E, or I can also right click, Show Only Selected, I'll only see that one item and nothing else. So this is what I started with once I had finished cleaning it up. And then the next thing was my seat, my 2 arms, my back pieces, my all around the edges pieces. So I can show them all here. Now I can either export them all one by one, but that kind of takes a long time. So what I can also do, instead of exporting them all piece by piece, which is something like this, click here and then do Export Mesh. That takes a long time, but so instead of doing each one, I'm going to do them all at the same time. And in order to do that, I'm going to select all of these and combine them together with the Combine tool. So I select every item I want to be placed together. Make sure I don't miss any. And then I click Apply and OK. And now there's a new thing in town called Combine 1. And although it looks like it's all together, it is still, in a way, separate. So that when I export it, I can save it as my OBJ, and then I can say Combined Design Chair. And from there on out, I can send that into my Exact Flat software to be able to separate all the different pieces. Thank you for watching.
This concludes part 2 on how to convert your scan to 3D CAD. In the next section, we'll cover how to flatten from 3D to 2D. It's part of our video series on how to triple your pattern making in 3 easy steps using ExactFlat Scan to Pattern. It's the faster, better, cheaper, and easier way to create patterns for all your products. Be sure to check out our other videos, and you can also contact us at your convenience for a demo or to learn more. We'll show you how.